Welcome to Practically Political. I'm Dave Spencer.
And I'm Carrie Sheffield. Let's get right to it. All right, Dave. So let's talk about inflation, our favorite topic. So we had record-breaking 7.9% inflation last month compared to a year prior. This is according to new data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And of course, just in time, Congress comes in and wants to make inflation even worse. They just passed a $1.5 trillion spending bill. It increases funding for a lot of pet projects, things like the Green New Deal. Why don't progressives seem to care about the negative effects of government spending on inflation? Senator Mike Lee had a great report with the Senate Joint Finance Committee, or the Joint Congressional Finance Committee, looking at lots of studies about how government spending causes inflation.
Well, I think, first of all, you can argue that the fact that Build Back Better wasn't passed took off some inflationary pressures. As I've said before, Carrie, I wish Build Back Better had been passed instead of the American Rescue Plan, because the American Rescue Plan contained a lot of handouts, whereas Build Back Better does contain a lot more investments, and I think it would be more beneficial to the country long term. But having said that, I think people realize that inflation is something that has come up. There's a lot of things that are out of control. When you look at fuel prices, when you look at stuff that's going on in Ukraine, when you look at a lot of international and domestic pressures. So I think that there's very little that a president can do about inflation. Presidents get blamed a lot for it, but it's like the economy. Short term, there's very little they can do. I think what they're trying to do now is good. They've been late in terms of ramping up production, but I think it's better late than never. And you're finally starting to see some domestic oil production. And I should just say, for all the Green New Dealers out here, I am the biggest supporter of alternative energy out there. But using natural gas and using our energy is far cleaner than the petrostates. They have the dirtiest, most environmentally destructive energy production in the world. So I think the bottom line is there's not so much they can do in the short term other than make sure that the energy production is going up. Your thoughts?
Well, I think that there are a lot of things that presidents can do to affect inflation, for good or for bad. Richard Nixon tried to do it through price controls, and that was a huge disaster. It made things
Terrible
even worse.
Idea.
So yeah, there is a huge impact. But the report that Senator Mike Lee put out was really interesting because he looked at all the many ways that might be counterintuitive that inflation can be increased, including through things like the fact that increased government spending requires more taxation, and more taxation puts more constraints on the economy, which drives prices up even more. And then there's also the crowd out effect of government services crowding out the private sector, which makes things more inefficient. And then there's just the fact that you're increasing the monetary supply. And that's something that, folks from the Chicago School of Economics would always say that inflation, Milton Friedman would always say that inflation is a monetary problem. And so you have the Federal Reserve encouraged by this White House and the Treasury to just keep treating the US dollar basically like monopoly money. So I think there's a lot that can be done to stop increasing this spending. And not to mention our debt. I mean, that's a whole other conversation, though.
Well, and I also think the stuff that you're talking about either hasn't happened yet or isn't in the plans. Taxes haven't been raised yet. Now, you can argue that the Democrats, because they have more wealthy people in their constituents now, have backed off of a lot of tax increases that I think could actually increase revenue without affecting behavior that much. And a lot of this spending is either hypothetical or it hasn't come into the pipeline yet in terms of the new budget and some of the increases. But again, I will say that I think that I've said, and we'll figure this out because time will tell. The history will bear us out. But I think by the election of 22, inflation will be down to 3 or 4%. But of course, that's my mouth to God's ear.